This is a video I have wanted to make for a very long time, and every time that I end up reshooting it, redoing it, um, over and over and over again, I always feel like there's something I'm missing, or I'm not saying enough, or there's something important I'm leaving out, or whatever thing it might be. But I've come to the realization that there's only choice. There's choice within the circumstances that we have. And right now, I've decided, even if I'm leaving out something important, even if there's something more I could have added or said to add on, it's better to speak and say something than to forever remain reserved and just be left wondering what your impact could have been. And that's what I'm trying to do here today. As we live in a time where society feels more fragmented than ever, people feel more divided than ever, more segregated than ever, physically segregated, physically divided, abstractly divided in thought, in process, and ideas. I think somebody has to just try and make sense of all of it and bring some sense of balance back. Well, and that's what I'm trying to do. I want to start with how I think we kind of got here and then why. As somebody who is pursuing a history major, or I will be starting my history major, I, of course, view this through a little bit more of a historical lens, but I also am viewing this through my experience. If you really want to understand where all this division today has come from, I think you have to go back to the industrial age. Now, this started roughly the 1750s, very, very early industrial revolution, but most of what I'm going to be talking about is the 1800s and onwards. During this time, you had mass immigration. You had a lot of people from countries like Ireland and Germany. A lot of those people became bakers, tailors, carpenters, watchmakers, brewers, engineers. They filled up a lot of jobs that took industrial factories, is what I'm getting at. Coal, textiles, natural gas, steam engines, all of these things started to become prevalent. And you needed workers. You needed workers for these jobs. And what a lot of these factory owners did is they would set rules of non basically you couldn't talk. A lot of these factory owners strictly enforced this because they believed talking inhibited work productivity of employees, and therefore many employees were literally just not allowed to talk at their job, or else they would risk being fired, or maybe their pay would be reduced. There'd be some punishment, right? And this social norm, I believe, carried over very much so all the way through the present day. But that was just the initial catalyst. I think what comes next is something far more important. Uh, what is the one thing that we all use today, most of us use today, that we take for granted? Well, it's the motor vehicle. What does the motor vehicle have anything to do with this? Well, after this industrial age, the age of industrialization, the motor vehicle was arguably the most prominent byproduct of the industrial age in terms of everyday civilian use. The motor vehicle fundamentally changed how we as a society operate. And I'm going to go through that, and there's a few just distinct ways I'll point out. I don't want to go too deep. First of all, the motor vehicle did something that is very invisible when you're not paying close attention, but once you understand it, it makes a lot of sense why things are kind of the way they are. Motor vehicles created mass physical segregation and division through the creation of the infrastructure needed to support them. We needed highways, interstates, roads, even something as simple as your driveway was another form of physical segregation and division. So, what you already had happen by the age of motor vehicles, by let's say I'm going to say roughly 40s and 50s is when motor 40s and 50s are when motor vehicles start to become definitely a more prominent thing in everyday civilian use. You start with the physical segregation and division that these motor vehicles create. They already are actively splitting communities apart, splitting people apart, splitting normal day-to-day interaction apart. But on top of that, they also did something else that, unlike any other time throughout our history, we have ever experienced. Motor vehicles essentially replaced the stable foundation of social interaction, and that was the horse. And you might be saying, what do horses and motor vehicles have anything to do with in common? Well, before the motor vehicle, the horse was the predominant mode of transport outside of the boat. And by predominant mode of transport, or medium of transport, I mean on the ground, the horse was. Once motor vehicles came about, they completely not only made horses useless, but they replaced one invisible function that the horse had. Because the horse was too slow enough, it it ensured that physical infrastructure and architecture had to be closely knitted together. The horse was simply too slow of a mode of transport, but it was also really the only medium of transport, that essential businesses like your blacksmiths, your carpenters, your food markets all had to be closely connected to the villages, homes, government buildings, magistrates, legal offices. All those things had to be closely connected together because the horse was a limiting factor. But limiting factor doesn't mean bad. It was the one thing that kept social glue in order, social interaction in order. So, if what you remember what I was just saying about how motor vehicles physically divided uh, our neighborhoods and our communities and social interaction, it's because motor vehicles created an unprecedented level or speed of travel that horses never even came close to matching. A horse gets exhausted. A horse needs food. It needs water. It needs to be bred. It needs grown. It needs raised by somebody. Somebody has to continue the generations. A car almost needs none of that. A car needs maintenance every once in a while, fuel to drive, but that's it. And cars essentially ensured that social interaction was basically dead. Dead because they replaced the one limiting factor that the horse had, and that was its speed, the horse's speed and the rate of speed. Now that the motor vehicle replaced that, what you are left with is essentially a isolated box where you are not required to talk to anybody. You don't have to have a single conversation. You can close your windows up, not talk to a single person, and then this is where the other problems come with the motor vehicle. They created a cycle. They completely redefined what it meant to have a job, what it means to work. Before, a lot of jobs would be held around the local community, right? You would be working maybe in a family business, you would be working at the store a mile down the road, a few miles down the road. But businesses, for the most part, were very much so close knitted to your local community, right? And what the motor vehicle did is it basically created this drastic change in lifestyle where people were working jobs very far away from their homes, their neighborhood, their communities. They're driving to these far out commutes, and they're spending half of their day, if not in many cases their entire day there. And so what happens when you combine this, when you combine the physical segregation and division of infrastructure and architecture because of motor vehicles, from motor vehicles like streets, roads, highways, interstates. You combine that with having jobs that require people to basically spend, usually at a minimum, half of their day at some distant place from their home or their neighborhood. And then you also combine it with the factor that essential businesses no longer really need to be close together to one another because businesses can branch out because people now can travel much faster and much quicker, meaning people aren't even shopping in the same places. They're not talking to their local neighbors that they would normally be talking to. because the businesses back then would normally be close together to people's homes and communities and villages. When you combine all of this together, you get a developing society that is incredibly detached socially. You get a society that is built off of physical segregation and division, and one that is built off of more internal, abstract, or ideological. There's not a really good word to put it, but that is the that is the second part. The third part that comes in much later. Now we have a society that has been already conditioned from the beginning of the industrial age to really not talk to one another. And then you have motor vehicles, which create all of this physical segregation and division through our streets, our roads, our highways, our interstates, uh, and the jobs, and you have all of that, right? What comes next is something that started within, not even, if you really want to be honest or frank, probably the last century or so. And I won't even consider this as something that really started until maybe 30 years ago at a minimum. The internet. I might be saying, how does the internet connect to all this? Well, the internet connects to this because here's what happened. You see, even though motor vehicles replaced so much social interaction, they created so much physical division and segregation. People were separated from one another because of the infrastructure that motor vehicles created and fostered. Most people still found time. They still had time at the end of their day or near the end of the day, once they got back home from work at like 5 or 6 o'clock, to go do something. And because there wasn't really much else to do, what would you go do? Well, you talk to your neighbors. You maybe do a grill out. You maybe bring the neighbors' kids over and they play with their kids and their kids. You talk about work. You talk about life. Social interaction still remained relatively stable. People would still go to some of the same stores. People would still meet one another. They would still go do things with one another. They'd still talk. They would talk things through. Neighbors would work out disagreements and conflicts and feuds. They would come to compromises and understandings, and humanity and society would continue on at a relatively normal-ish rate. Motor vehicles still did a lot of damage to that infrastructure, but it was still there. The internet essentially ensured social interaction was dead, gone, completely gone. In person social interaction. And there's an important distinction because anybody who has grown up in my age, for example, will tell you that digital interaction doesn't even remotely equate to in-person interaction. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures. And when you take away the subtle emotional nuances in looking somebody in the eye that is right in front of you, listening to someone, listening to their cadence, every little enunciation they make, how they articulate themselves, how they appear, every subtle movement. Those things are so important to functioning as a healthy individual and cumulatively as a society. The internet replaced all of that. But how? How did it do that? The reason why I brought up that people, even during the age of motor vehicles, when they really began to take over, still had that missing time to fill things with, is because the internet filled the rest of that time. You see, the reason why people usually hung out with their neighbors, maybe they had their neighbors' kids over and their neighbors' kids over, they talked to one another, settled those disagreements, made compromises, whatever, is because there was still nothing really to do during that time. The internet provides that fills in that gap. It is both everything and nothing at the same time. The internet, what it has done is it has provided endless stimulus. You can just scroll endlessly on social media and achieve basically nothing. Nothing that is productive to you as an individual, but you are just consuming. And what happens is now you have a really big problem as a society. You have a society that is built entirely off of assumptions of one another than actually knowing one another. Here's such a perfect example. How many times a day do you get on your phone and you look at somebody's profile on Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on Reddit, on LinkedIn, whatever your profession might be, whatever you might be doing, and you see somebody post something about their family and how they went to this place and how awesome it was and how amazing it was, and you think to yourself, wow, those people seem kind of snobby, or wow, okay, I wish I had that money. Like, wow, these guys kind of wow, these guys suck. I wish I had that. That is entirely built off assumptions. You don't know what their lives are like. You don't know anything about them. That is the problem that the internet has fostered. We have It has created a society that is built off of supposed abstract or distant somewheres instead of physically grounded in person here and nows. Our own physically grounded in person here and nows to each of us as individuals. That is the problem. And it has done this, like I said, because it provides endless stimulus. It has every single thing an individual could possibly ever need or want, because it provides every single niche, every single field, every single medium, everything, everything. And it's not just the internet necessarily; it's smartphones too. I think, oh my God, here's such a great example. Take a mobile game like Clash of Clans. I have seen people spend hours of their day playing mobile games. Why? Not because they really want to play mobile games, but because deep down, it keeps them distracted. It keeps them distracted from dealing with this, and that is another problem. When you combine what the motor vehicle has created already with the physical segregation and division through all the infrastructure, streets, roads, interstates, highways, like I said, then you combine it with the internet filling in the rest of that time, the most that people used to just talk to neighbors or talk to people in person, then what you get is this weird isolated bubble, right? You get these echo chambers. You get people who think that what is being said on the internet reflects what is the majority opinion in reality. But that is not how it works. I mean, look at the last election. People were shocked that Donald Trump won the election. A lot of people were. I wasn't. You know why I wasn't? Because I understood something fundamental about the internet that most people don't seem to get. The vocal majority on the internet are the small vocal minority in person. And why is that? Because the overwhelming vocal majority, or I should say not vocal majority, the overwhelming majority in person and everyday day-to-day life are just consumers. They don't post anything. They're not posting on Reddit. They're not making videos. They're not creating content. They're watching content. It is the very small vocal minority in person of everyday people that create the vocal majority on the internet. And that is why there is such a major disconnect. Because in reality, most people are not they're not outraged by everything. They're not out to get you. They're not out to end the world. Most people have a job to maintain. They have to worry about finances. They have to worry about supporting their kids, taking care of their parents, their grandparents. They have to worry about things that a lot of people who occupy that the vocal majority on the internet don't, because maybe those people just they have money that they don't have to worry about. They can spend all their time doing that. And so that's another fundamental disconnect. So let me just give a brief recap. So we have constructed a society globally, not just the United States. This is a global phenomenon, absolutely a global phenomenon. We've constructed a society globally that basically has fostered all of the conditions necessary for complete social isolation. And when you create that society, guess what you allow? You allow the convenient and easy exploitation of a small group of individuals to try and dictate the will of the vast majority. And this is where I'm going to get into the why we live in this time, why there is so much just illogical, nonsensical, emotional extremism, antagonism, assuming the intentions of other people, all of this just this hateful, vitriolic outrage and constant argumentation, constant rhetoric. Well, it goes back to one central source: politics. And I know everybody loves politics, right? We all love politics. No, we don't. Here is the problem with politics when you combine them with the factors that industrialization, motor vehicles, and the internet have created, especially the internet. You create a perfect breeding ground for politics to essentially overtake and overrun every aspect of the internet. And because they overrun every aspect of the internet, they begin genuinely bleeding in to everyday physical in-person reality. Because the more that vocal minority of people in everyday day-to-day physical life are the vocal majority on the internet, become the vocal majority on the internet, then the the majority in person, the majority of people in everyday day-to-day life, not the majority on the internet, the majority of people in everyday day-to-day life truly begin to believe what the vocal minority is saying is true. They truly begin to believe it. And I think there is no more perfect example in this. This is what I can't stand, and this is what so many people, especially in my country, the United States, are incredibly fed up and tired with. How many people, let's take it a few years back, how many people, when the Ukraine war started, and in my country, on the Democrat Party, or whatever country you live in, whatever more liberal leaning, left wing, progressive leaning party, how many people who align themselves with that party and politicians in that party began this endless barrage of performative activism and virtue signaling? And then, just a few years later, pretended like it never happened and they don't talk about it anymore. Moved on to the next convenient thing. That is what is the problem. Because political parties just cannot endure the internet in the hands of the average politician. Why is that? Why is it that way? I don't think political parties are inherently bad. I think what is inherently bad is the way in which my country's political system works, and I will describe why I think that's the problem, and I will also describe why I think the latter is also true for a lot of other countries in Europe or Asia. Okay, in the United States, we have our sort of binary two-party system. You have the two major parties. You have the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. On one hand, having it be the simplified system where one side is usually conservative, the other side is progressive, makes politics easier to digest and understand. On the other side of it, it also makes it so that complex issues get turned into simple absolutes. Like, it's either good or evil, right or wrong, God exists or God doesn't exist. That's not how the world functions, though. It never has. Reality is nuanced. And so, when you introduce this system, the problem with this system is that it fundamentally encourages and promotes extremism, emotional extremism, I should say, and antagonism. Because political parties fundamentally operate on one condition, really. They operate on the condition of conforming and aligning themselves with the fundamental rights and needs that people want, that people need. Having food on the table, having shelter, having drinkable water, having a place to call home, having a job, having security in society, being able to walk outside and know that you're not going to get shot in the head. Like that, those are what political parties conform to because they are fundamental rights and needs and things that people need and want in order to function. And so when you take that and you put it in this two-party system, you of course what's going to happen is you are going to get this nonstop battle of us versus them, because every single politician in either party wants their party to win, because you have created a system where it's just two parties. It's either they win or we lose, or they win or they lose or we win. That's a problem. And so, of course, politicians are going to take every means necessary to secure their win. They will do anything it takes. They will foster complete societal division and segregation. They will spew all of the curveballing of stories that they can. They will foster as much argumentation and rhetoric as they can, as much antagonism, as much just hatred, and any tool they can use to win over enough people so that they win. And so where I was going with this is, guess what happens when you introduce this system to the internet? You get complete freaking disaster. You get just a complete disaster. You have celebrities and people like Hollywood that fall in this trap, and they spew the same problem. The Democrat Party wants to win at all costs. The Republican Party wants to win at all costs, because it's just us versus them. That is what they have created. That is what our political system has created, is us versus them. But it's not us versus them. There is no other. There is no oppositionary, different, fundamentally different human being. Okay? And this is what I'm trying to drive home. Because of this system, the internet has been overrun by vitriolic outrage, antagonism, emotional extremism, hatred, constant argumentation, and what we have lost in the process. What we have lost in the process is our own humanity. We have lost our own humanity. We are not civilized. We have turned to using the most just horrible language that we can say to people. We have gone to the utmost extreme to destroy other people's lives, and all for what? All for what exactly? So you can get another performative point for whatever party you're participating in, to make yourself seem so much better, so much more enlightened, like you are the morally correct one, you are the ethically right one. Look at the damage that this has caused. This is why I wanted to make this video, because nobody else is saying this. Nobody else is saying what needs to be said in the way that it needs to be said. Yes, people are talking about how the Democrat Party is doing this bad thing, or the Republican Party is doing this bad thing, but they're not talking about the root of the problem. I am trying to talk about the root of the problem. And where has this gotten us? It has gotten us absolutely nowhere. We have replaced the simple notion of discussion, trying to find a common solution for everybody involved, with constant argumentation and rhetoric. And argumentation and rhetoric almost always ensure that there is a winner and then there is a loser, which means that of course you don't get positive progress. You get negative results most of the time, because if somebody has to lose in order for a solution to be made, then is it really a solution? I don't think so. And that's another problem. I know I've kind of gotten lost in my train of thought here, but it's hard to articulate all of this. It is hard to piece it all together, because it is so much to sift through. There's so much to talk about, and I'm trying my absolute best to condense it. So let me do a brief recap, because I think that is so important. It started, all of this segregation and division started in the industrial age. With industrialization, factory workers ensured that employees most of the time could not speak to one another. This laid the foundation for what motor vehicles then fostered to become even more powerful or stronger than they would have if the age of industrialization, the not talking norms were not enforced. So, motor vehicles essentially created even more, or I shouldn't say created even more. They created physical segregation and division through our infrastructure and our architecture that cars needed. Streets, highways, interstates, roads, even our own driveways segregate us from our own neighbors and talking to our own neighbors most of the time. You don't even realize it because it's psychological. It's not a physical limitation, really. It's more psychological. But just that is even a minor thing. So, motor vehicles created that physical segregation and division. They also made it so that people aren't going to the same places. They aren't going to the same stores, so neighbors aren't talking to one another on a regular basis. People aren't talking to one another on a regular basis in their own neighborhoods or what would have then beforehand been smaller towns, even villages in some places, right? Because motor vehicles allowed businesses to expand much further out. And so people aren't walking to places anymore. They're driving. And because they can drive, well, instead of one food market, there's five food markets. And instead of everybody in the neighborhood going to one food market, you have Ted and George going to one food market. You got Bill and Bob going to another food market, and then you got Jeff and you got Steve going to another food market. So the problem is now you got people going all over the place. They're not even talking to one another. And then on top of that, motor vehicles, because of how fast they are and how efficient they are and how rapidly you can get from places, they also created a completely fundamentally new kind of society of what it meant to work a job. People are then going to jobs that are far away from their homes, far away from their neighborhoods, spending usually a minimum half of their day there and sometimes a full day. By the time they get back home, um, they're going to be maybe talking to their family a little bit, but they'll still hang out with their neighbors. They'll still talk to their neighbors, right? Because there was still that empty time to fill in. Then comes the internet. The internet essentially says, no, you don't need to talk to your neighbors. You need to play Clash of Clans. You need to play World of Tanks on your console or on your PC. You need to play this or that. You need to watch the streaming service. You need to look at social media. You need to see, oh my God, did you see what Trump just did the other day? Did you see what Zelensky just did the other day? Did you see what Netanyahu just did the other day? Oh my God, look, the BBC, New York Times, New York Post. Oh my God, everything. The world's going crazy. We're all blowing up. That is what the internet does. Like I said, endless stimulus, both everything and nothing at the same time. So when the internet came out and provided that and filled in that time that used to exist before it existed, the time that used to exist before it existed, where people would talk to people, talk to others, talk to their neighbors, talk to their friends, go visit them, it basically ensured that social interaction went to almost complete just zero. People, of course, still talk to one another. We still talk to one another in person. Of course, that still happens. But what I'm trying to highlight is how all of this cumulatively comes together and creates a society that is incredibly physically segregated and divided because of the conditions we have created, because of the effects and cascading impacts of things like the industrial age and industrial revolution, uh, motor vehicles, the internet, and then lastly, where we get to the why, again, just to summarize, political parties. Political parties essentially take the how, they take all of these things, all of this social isolation, this division and segregation, and they ensure that people are so busy fighting amongst one another over fundamental rights and issues that we never, ever dare to even think about any of this. We don't think about how the internet impacts us. We don't think about how motor vehicles impact us. We don't think about industrialization in the ways that we should be thinking about them. We keep thinking about them in the wrong ways. We keep not seeing the cumulative picture, but this is the cumulative picture. Political parties have basically ensured that we keep staying in this constant state of conflict and heightened, on edge, just vitriolic rhetoric and emotional extremism and antagonism instead of trying to just understand one another. That is the problem. And of course, they do this because they base their platforms, political parties base their platforms on fundamental needs and rights that people want. And if you base your platform on that and you make your party the most vocal, you make your party the most vocal out of any other party, then people will follow that party. And that is how you've seen, for example, in my country, the Democrat Party um, get a lot of the votes because they employ every tactic they can to make it seem like people on the other side, because there really isn't an other side. That is what I'm trying to drive home. Make them seem like they're these horrible people, that they're anti everything, that they're terrible, that they're tyrannical, that they they want to take over the other side, they want to oppress people. But that's not what is happening. That's not what's happening. What is happening, rather, is they're conditioning people to believe that there is another side, but there is not another side. There is only us. And that is what I was trying to emphasize in the title of this video. We are not enemies. We are not. We are one people. We continuously keep being segregated and divided, both physically and by thought, by all of these processes, whatever you want, however you want to define it, and we don't even realize it because they're so invisible. Because people are so caught up in their day-to-day responsibilities, their jobs, having to take care of their families, all of these things that are perfectly understandable, that we all live through, we all do every day, that we don't see how these things are silently pulling the strings behind our lives, but they are. They are pulling the strings. And that is why there's also been a growing disillusionment with political parties and politics and the internet and all of these things, because people are finally beginning to realize that we cannot continue to live in a society that functions like this. We cannot continue to live in a society built entirely off of assumptions instead of understanding people. And that is how I think we have gotten to where we are today. But instead of just ending the video here, instead of just leaving it at that, I want to also talk about how we can move forward, how we can start making initial changes to be better. And I think it starts with one fundamental thing. We have to, we have to find balance between absolutes and nuance. What do I mean by absolutes? Well, if you remember what I said, an absolute, or like I gave earlier, is there's only good or evil, right or wrong, God exists, God doesn't exist. Absolutes can be helpful sometimes for a society to function, right? Sometimes you need an absolute, like anybody who does unwanted harm into another person that is like permanent harm. We don't want that in society. That's an absolute that can function most of the time, and it functions well, and it needs to function, because without it, society would just fall apart, right? But when you have absolutes that are too rigid, when you have absolutes that are, you're either a far right bigot or a far left snowflake libtard, right? That's when it goes too far. That's when it goes too far, because now you have created this black and white view of the world, and you have created this illusion, this idea that it's us versus them. But it's not us versus them. In reality, it's you against you. That's what it is. It's you against you. But you don't realize that. You don't realize that because we are so caught up in all of this. And I'm not saying I'm immune to it, or trying to make myself elevated above it. No, I spent so long stuck in this that when I finally got out of it, I couldn't stand just not saying anything about it. And that's why I'm saying something about it. Now, moving on to nuance. You might think, well, what could possibly be bad about nuance? Well, here's the problem with nuance. Let's say you create a rule like a wrongful act is any act that incurs unwanted harm unto another being by a conscious one, right? Some philosophical tenet, right? Well, here's the problem with nuance. You can expand that point into 1,000 different points until it becomes absolutely useless and you can't do anything with it. And that is what has happened in our modern day with a lot of political discussion. Something starts off with a good ideal, like we should end animal poachers who just poach animals for profits and kill them for profits, right? Cool, that's great. Then what happens though is then you get branched off into all these different things. Well, okay, do we protect the rhino species here or this rhino species here? Or well, this rhino actually helps build computer chips somewhere in Taiwan, so we can't do that. But oh wait, nope, this political bill right here says we cannot touch these rhinos because they're actually really useful in getting the ivory for pianos. Oh wait, no, I'm a musician. I'm a musician. Actually, that law only apply. You see the problem? Nuance also can become negative when it creates just endless. I think there's no better a fitting term, endless bureaucracy in a sense. There's one layer after this layer after this layer after this layer, nothing gets done. That's kind of like what you see in some governments, like in Japan, for example. A lot of the times, from my perception, I don't know if this is entirely true, but I see it a lot. I see it a lot portrayed in Japanese media by Japanese media is it seems like a lot of government decisions are slowed down by endless bureaucracy for just simple decisions. And I could see how that could be true. And even if it isn't at that rate, every country suffers from this, right? Every country suffers from bureaucracy, endless bureaucracy. The Supreme Court, for example, in my country, suffers from this a lot. So, why do I say we need balance between absolutes and nuance? Because as I just explained, you can't have one you can't have one extreme over the other. If absolutes become dominant, you create a world that is entirely defined by black and white views and us versus them doctrines. If you create a world that is entirely built on nuance, you create a world where nothing can get done because there's 5,000 different layers to one singular problem and therefore nobody can agree on anything. So we have to find balance. I think that is the most important fundamental internal step. Internal, not external, but internal. I think the most important next step that is external has to do with how we're interacting with one another in society. Start talking to our neighbors again in person. Start walking down the street, maybe just hosting a neighborhood party. Get your neighbors together. Get them to start talking to one another. Start talking to people one another. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gym, when you go to a pastry shop, just make that additional extra effort to have a conversation with somebody. Because if enough people start doing that, we will start breaking down so much of the social disconnect we have created, so much of the social segregation and division and isolation that we have created. And the other aspect to that is so many people are so obsessed with this that they're not doing things like going to the gym. But we need to start doing that. Start going to places in person, physically in person, that align with your hobbies. For some people, it's going to the gym. For some people, maybe it's going to a local art place. Maybe there's a Warhammer store across a Warhammer store in your mall where you can talk with a lot of other people who like Warhammer because you like it too, and maybe you can work on building the sets. It's simple things like that we need to start doing again to start rebuilding this social connection that we have so lost. The next part to all of this is something honestly rather simple. We have no compassion in our society anymore. We have no empathy, we have no sympathy. Instead, what we have is we have performative compassion. We have performative empathy and we have performative sympathy. How many times have you seen celebrities from Hollywood, for example, preach about some bull crap about how they care so much about LGBTQ rights, or they care about Black Lives Matter, or they care about all these things, and then a week later, once the media attention is gone off of them, they don't talk about it ever again until the next year comes around and until the next thing happens. That happens constantly, and I'm so sick and tired of it. And that can be fixed if we just have a little more actual compassion for one another. Why is it that we place ourselves on these grand moral pedestals and we believe ourselves to be so much more enlightened and right than the other person, while knowing that we have made so many mistakes and regrets in our life just as other people have? We are not we're not perfect. We are imperfect. In fact, it is imperfection that gives us meaning. If everything were perfect, what would be the point to any of this? What would be the point to even making this video right now? There wouldn't be. There really wouldn't. And so that is another thing we need. And I will say one of the last things that we need, that I will sort of end with here, is we need to stop. We need to stop acting on assumptions and being presumptuous of other people. That is the number one thing I think that is just killing our social stability and societal stability, especially in my country. It is destroying and crippling us. I can't tell you how many times I have seen people claim the most insane things about another person. Like, here's a perfect example. How many people call Charlie Kirk a Nazi and just throw that term around and know nothing about it? They don't know anything about the history of World War II to any real extent. They don't know how any of it started. They don't know about the mass propaganda, the arresting of political rivals, the Hitler being elected democratically. They don't know about any of that, yet they feel so entitled. They feel so entitled uh, that their opinion is fact when they know almost nothing about it. And that is because it is all presumptuous. It is all assumption. People just not only do they assume everything about another person, but they just assume that the people that they put their stock in, their faith in, their political party, their news outlet, their journalist outlet, that they must be right, that they must be true. And so they won't use any critical thinking of any kind. They won't think about it. They won't do any research. They'll just say Charlie Kirk is a Nazi and go on about their day and not even give second thought about it because they didn't even give second thought about even thinking about it initially. That is a problem. And that needs to end too. And do you know how that ends? By doing what I just said. We need to start talking to one another in person again. We need to start finding a balance between absolutes and nuance. We need to start or stop assuming everything about one another. Stop with all of these presumptions. And overall, we need more compassion. We need more compassion for one another. Because if we don't have compassion, then all of this stupidity will continue. And I suppose one final thing I will end on is there is a difference between discussion and argumentation. How does this tie in? Well, because I think it applies to everything I've talked about. And this one subtle distinction, I think, is what dictates the difference between somebody who is being healthy with themselves and somebody who is not. Discussion aims to find a common solution for everybody involved. That is usually its main goal. Discussion doesn't have a typical winner or a loser. Argumentation, on the other hand, almost always ensures that somebody loses for somebody to win. And this isn't just a problem in law, it isn't a problem in, in government, it isn't just a problem in that. It's a problem in day-to-day social interaction in life. If you have this constant belief that everything needs to be an argument, then people will continue to employ all of this emotional extremism, all of this antagonism. They will continue, we will continue to be vitriolic towards one another. All of this hate mongering and animosity will continue. But if we instead reframe it, a simple reframing to discussion, finding a common solution, making the effort to try and understand somebody and not just building a presumption about everything that somebody stands for. We try and make a genuine effort to understand them, and they do the same for us. They reciprocate, and we use discussion to try and find a common solution. Then we eliminate so much of this. I have a lot more I'm sure I could say, and I'm sure there's something I may be forgetting, there's something I may be leaving out, but I just simply felt that this video had to be made. A video like this had to be made because right now, I think society needs a video like this more than ever. I think people, the entire world, needs a video like this more than ever. We are not different people fundamentally. I shouldn't even put it that way. Are we different? Yes. Do we have different cultures? Do we have different beliefs? Do we have different religions, different governments? Yes, we do. But at the end of the day, we are all humans. We are not enemies. We are one people. We always have been, and we always will. We are always struggling in a struggle against all of the confusion. And that is what this all boils down to, really, is misunderstanding and confusion. People oftentimes don't want to come to compromises, don't want to try and understand somebody else because it is easier to not do so. It takes far less effort and it's easier to just paint yourself as the good person. But oftentimes, it takes a lot harder work to be good because in order to be truly good, in order to be a good, compassionate person, it requires looking inward towards yourself. And that is something else we also need to practice. We need to look inward before we can we can proclaim that we know everything about somebody else outwardly. And I think if we just do that, if we stop treating one another so poorly, if we start looking at these things, if we start analyzing and understanding how we got here and why we are the way we are today, then we can create change. We can change. In fact, I think I can't remember if it was Obama who said it, but um, it was something along the lines of this, and I'm paraphrasing. While history has always had its ups and downs, we always seem to be going up overall. We always have points of tension, but we always learn from them. It seems like we always grow. It's like a roller coaster. We always have a point where we go up and a point where we go down, but every time we go up higher. We go up higher. And while sometimes we might go down just the same amount, it seems like overall we seem to always go up higher more than we go down. And I think that's true. I genuinely believe that humanity is inherently good. I just think that we get so lost in one another. We get confused and we misunderstand one another. But I'm trying to be the voice that brings people back together, and I really hope I have done that in some way. I really hope I have done that in some way. I know segregation and division will likely exist in some form, and that's not always bad in all instances. Segregation can literally be something as simple as Switzerland being away from Poland geographically. Yeah, that's physical segregation. Is that bad? No. It just means that two countries are physically segregated. But it's when segregation and division are harmful that they're bad. That is what I'm trying. That is what I'm trying to reduce. Um, there's a lot more I'm sure I could say, like I said before, but I will leave you with this. I will leave you with this final thought. Throughout all the centuries of human history, while we have had conflict, while we have had violence, while we have had horrific atrocities, we have also always gone up. We have always come together more than we have fought one another. And it might not seem like that, but look at where we are today. Even with all of this division and segregation, we are connected more than ever before. More than ever before. And while that connection might seem like we are more disconnected than ever before, because we are in many ways, the internet creates an illusion of connection uh, that really isn't there in person. We are still more connected globally overall in our ideas, our technologies. Countries work with one another all the time. We create common things we can all work on, and peace overall seems to continue to be. We seem to be getting more and more peace every decade that passes by, every year. And while I know it might seem like humanity is always negative, I just don't think it is. I don't think it is because ultimately, like I said, even though we go down, we always go up more than we go down. we are not we are not enemies. We are not. Okay? That is what I want to end with. I am not your enemy. I am not I am not just a Republican or just a Democrat. I am not just a anything. I am a human being and so are you, and you should treat yourself with a little more respect and treat others with that same respect that you honestly should be giving to yourself, but oftentimes we are not. So I will leave it at that. We are one people. We always have been. We always will be. We will always be diverse. We will always have our own unique cultures. But ultimately, in spirit and spirit, we are one people. No more harmful division. No more socio political hatred. We are not enemies. We are one people. It is easier to envision the world as a negative, horrible place full of violent and cruel people at every turn. But the reality is, your next door neighbor is not a Nazi, they are not a fascist, they are not a far right bigot, and they are not a far left libtard. They're a human being. They're a human being with the same amount of nuance, regrets, mistakes, and humanity as you. We are not in some grand war where there is the horrible people on this side and the horrible people on the other side. That's not what's happening. And that is what I'm trying to get across. We simply live in a time where we misunderstand one another more than ever. We assume everything about one another more than ever. And we make quick judgments that are unfounded more than ever. But, like I said, I believe that if we truly make an effort, we truly make an effort as individuals, and we truly make an effort as a collective society, collective global society, I should say. I I think we can do it. But I think we just got to try, man. We got to try. And that's what I'm doing here today. I can say all of these things, and I know to me, because I'm the one speaking, it makes sense to me, but I recognize that obviously it's harder to articulate my internal or inner world to a massive broad audience. So what I'm just going to leave with ultimately is one piece of final advice, I guess you could say, one observation, an observation, but also it's actionable too. For the past decade, if not past few decades, we have created a society where we live off of supposed abstract or distant somewheres. We focus all of our energy on those instead of living in physically grounded, in person, here and nows. We have forgotten what it means to just live as ourselves, our own individual selves, and our own just local life, our neighborhoods, our communities, just as us. We have become so obsessed with this constantly, always just consuming so much of our life that even our connections to other people, we are focusing on supposed abstract or distant connections to people over, once again, physically grounded, in person, here and nows, present here and nows. We keep worrying so much about what's happening in China or Japan or Bangladesh or India or some random celebrity, or what's happening in Hollywood, or what's happening in the New York Times and the New York Post, and What video game released today? Oh, the Black Ops 5 controversy. Oh, the GTA 6 controversy. Um, this political candidate's controversy. Oh, this thing about Hillary Clinton. This thing about Bernie Sanders. We are literally drowning our minds. We are drowning our minds. The human mind is not meant for that level of abstraction. It is meant for being here, being present, talking with friends, working with your community, working with your family. That is what it's meant for. That doesn't mean that it's not capable of highly abstract thought. No, that's what I'm doing here today. I am trying to give abstract thought, but I'm also trying to warn about what happens when abstraction replaces practical reality. And that is what we have done. We have replaced practical reality with endless abstraction. So I will just leave that advice of, if the first step we need to take, the first step we need to take, I think that is actionable, that is actionable to our external lives, I think is that step. Now, we obviously have to break down all of these presumptions and assumptuous behavior about other people, presumptuous behavior. I keep using those words interchangeably, but they are slightly different. We have to break that down, but I think that those two things are a good first step, and the other things I said earlier. Ultimately, I know this was a long video, and I know it's a lot to sit through. I mean, gosh, I'm at like what, that 1 hour mark or something. Um, I guess I will just leave it with this. Um, I said earlier that I think that we can change and we can do it, but I'm going to amend that statement. I know we can. I know we can because I've seen humanity do it in our future, in our past. I have seen it happen again and again throughout history. Every time there is a fall, there is always a rise, and every time, even though it might not initially be positive, it becomes positive eventually. And I know that will happen because if enough people like me really care enough, then it will. And that's something I didn't stress enough here. I didn't create this because this was just some random side passion project. I created this because it was one born out of necessity. I have watched the past 5 or 6 years or so as terrorists are being called good people and good people are being called terrorists. I have watched as rational, logical minded people, moral and ethical people, are labeled as criminals, labeled as extremists, labeled with every negative label that can be put on them, because it is easier to silence somebody when you attach label. Labels dehumanize through objectification. When you turn somebody into an object, you don't have to have any remorse for what you say about them because you strip their humanity from them. I have seen the same thing play out again and again and again. And not only am I tired of it, but if we don't do something about this, you are going to be the one labeled next as an extremist. And that is what I'm trying to get people to see. You are not immune from all of this that you perpetuate and foster if you participate in it. And a lot of times, people don't even know they're participating in it. That's another reason why I'm making this video, because people don't even realize it. They're not even realize that they're being essentially used as a pawn. That is what many people are being used as right now, a pawn. And I just can't live in a world where I know that this is happening and not say something about it when I know I can say something about it because I'm aware that it's happening. It doesn't make me some enlightened genius. It just means I see that it's happening and I can't just sit here and not commentate on it. And that's what I'm doing. But with all that said, I know this was a long video And I know you've been here a long time. I know I just said that earlier. I'm kind of regurgitating, but um, I will leave it. I will leave it here. I think. Um, I know we can change, and we will for the better. We will, because I know it takes a catalyst sometimes for things to happen, and I hope in some ways I can be a very minor, small catalyst. And even if not, even if this just help one person, that's one person that I hope is maybe a little better from it. I don't know, but thank you for your time tremendously. I mean, I really mean that. And best of luck.